The estate requires a legitimate heir. The trustee's voice was as dry as old parchment, echoing in the cavernous silence of the Blackwood Library. Your Grace, it has been 6 years. The entail is quite specific. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, did not look up from the glass of amber liquid he was swirling. The fire crackled, a lonely, defiant sound against the oppressive weight of the room. 6 years. 6 years since the house had held anything but the ghosts of laughter and the lingering scent of betrayal. He had filled the silence with work, with ledgers and tenants, and the cold mechanics of running a duchy. He had tried to fill it with anything other than the memory of her face. Eleanor. The name was a shard of glass in his throat. He saw her as she had been that last day, not screaming, not crying. That would have been easier to bear. She had simply stood there, her face a pale, frozen mask, while he laid out his brother's damnable evidence on the polished mahogany table. Forged letters, whispered testimony from a paid maid, a tapestry of lies so expertly woven he had mistaken it for truth. He had been a fool, a proud, arrogant, blind fool. "I am aware of the requirements, Mr. Henderson," Alistair said, his voice a low rasp. The liquor burned a path down his chest, a familiar, welcome pain. "Your brother, Lord Frederick, has been a great support," the trustee continued, oblivious. "But he is not the direct line. The Blackwood title must be secured." Frederick. The name was acid. For years, Alistair had believed his brother's grief was a mirror of his own. He had accepted his counsel, leaned on his supposed strength. Only in the last year had the cracks in the facade begun to show, a slip of the tongue here, a nervous glance there, a growing, suffocating sense of unease that coiled in Alistair's gut whenever Frederick was near. The doubt had been a single, insidious seed, but it had taken root in the barren soil of his heart and grown into a thorny, choking vine. It was what had driven him to begin his quiet investigation. He had hired a man in London, a discreet inquiry agent who specialized in secrets. The first report had arrived 2 days ago, a thin envelope that felt as heavy as a tombstone. It contained the location of a former housemaid, dismissed for theft shortly after Eleanor's departure. The agent had found her in a Liverpool gin house, and for the price of her passage to America, she had sung a song of Frederick's coin in carefully coached lies. Each word of the report had been another blow from a hammer, shattering the world he had built on that single, catastrophic lie. He had not just been wrong. He had been a willing pawn in his wife's destruction. He had taken the word of a jealous younger brother over the woman who had shared his bed, the woman who had looked at him with eyes full of a hope he had been too callow to understand. He had thrown her away, his duchess, his wife. He had cast her out with nothing but the clothes on her back, condemning her for a sin she had never committed. "I will handle the matter of the succession," Alistair said, the words tasting like ash. He stood, the movement abrupt, final. The trustee, startled, gathered his papers. The Duke walked to the window, staring out at the manicured lawns of Blackwood Manor. It was a perfect picture of aristocratic order, a gilded cage, beautiful and empty. He had the title, the wealth, the power, and he was rotting from the inside out. The estate did not need an heir. He needed redemption. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would find it with her, or not at all. He had to find her. He had to undo the damage he had done. He had to beg for a forgiveness he in no way deserved. The wind carried the scent of salt and baking bread. It was the smell of Seabrook, the smell of home. Eleanor, now known to the small fishing village as Ellen, pressed her hands into the mound of dough on the flowered wooden table. The rhythmic work was a meditation, a comfort. Her hands, once soft and accustomed to embroidery needles and the cool ivory of piano keys, were now strong and capable, dusted with a permanent layer of flour. She had built a life here, in this cottage at the edge of the world, a small, simple life, but it was hers. It was real. Unlike the suffocating velvet and polished silence of Blackwood Manor, her cottage was filled with the scent of rising yeast, the warmth of the hearth, and the sound of a child's bright, unending questions. "Mama, will the tide be high today?" Eleanor smiled without turning. "Ask me again in an hour, my love. It will be a little higher then." Arthur, her son, sat at the small table by the window, meticulously arranging a collection of seashells into a spiral. He was 6 years old, a whirlwind of boundless energy and startling observations. He was her heart, her purpose, the anchor that had kept her from being swept away by the storm of her past. He was also the living image of his father. He had Alistair's thick, dark hair that refused to be tamed and a stubborn set to his small jaw. But it was his eyes that were a constant, painful reminder. They were the same impossible shade of gray, like a winter sky just before a storm. Sometimes, when he looked at her with a particularly serious expression, it was like looking at the man she had married, the man who had destroyed her. She had arrived in Seabrook 6 years ago, a wraith with haunted eyes and a secret growing in her womb. She had collapsed on the doorstep of the bakery, and its owner, the widowed and fiercely kind Agnes Finch, had taken her in. Agnes had asked no questions, had simply offered a bowl of soup, a warm bed, and later a job. Eleanor had become Ellen, a distant cousin from up north, a widow with a sad story she never told. The villagers accepted her. They were a people accustomed to the harsh whims of the sea. They understood survival. They did not pry. Here she was not a duchess. She was Ellen, the baker's assistant, Arthur's mother. It was a freedom she had never known, bought at an unbearable price. She punched down the risen dough, the motion firm, cathartic. She had long ago stopped crying over Alistair. The grief had burned itself out, leaving behind a hard, protective scar tissue around her heart. What remained was a cold, simmering anger and a fierce, primal need to protect her son from the world that had so easily discarded her. Arthur would never know the cold judgment of the aristocracy. He would never be a pawn in their games of power and succession. He would be a boy who knew the tides, who could bake a decent loaf of bread, and who was loved unconditionally. A knock sounded at the door. It was too early for deliveries. Agnes was at the market. Arthur hopped off his chair. "I'll get it." "Arthur, wait," Eleanor called, wiping her hands on her apron. A prickle of unease, a forgotten instinct from another life, traced its way down her spine. Strangers were rare in Seabrook. Before she could stop him, her son had pulled the heavy wooden door open. Standing on her doorstep, silhouetted against the bright morning sun, was a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in clothes of such fine make and dark color that they seemed to suck the very light from the air around them. He looked entirely out of place, a creature from a different world dropped into her small, safe one. Then he moved, stepping forward out of the glare, and the world stopped. It was him, Alistair. He was older. There were lines of strain around his eyes she did not recognize, a faint dusting of silver at his temples. But it was him. The same strong jaw, the same imposing presence, and the same stormy gray eyes, which were not looking at her, but were fixed, utterly stunned, on the small boy standing at the door. Arthur stared up at the tall stranger, unafraid. "Good morning, sir. Are you lost?" Alistair's gaze flickered from the boy to Eleanor, and in that one look she saw a universe of shock, confusion, and a dawning, horrifying comprehension. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked back at Arthur, at the dark hair, the stubborn chin, the mirror of his own eyes. Eleanor felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The air in her lungs turned to ice. She moved purely on instinct, a mother protecting her cub. She swept forward, pulling Arthur behind her skirts, her body forming a shield between her son and the ghost who had just walked back into her life. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice was not the soft, cultured tone of a duchess. It was low and hard and sharp as broken glass. Alistair finally found his voice, but it was a choked, ragged thing. Eleanor. The name, her name, felt alien on his tongue. She was not that woman anymore. That woman was dead. He had killed her. "You have no right," she said, her voice trembling with a fury that had lain dormant for 6 years. "You have no right to be here. You have no right to say my name." "Mama!" Arthur's small voice piped up from behind her. "Who is this man?" The question hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Alistair's eyes were locked on hers, pleading, desperate, but all she could see was the library at Blackwood, the cold condemnation in his face as he had sent her away. He had chosen to believe a lie then. He had shattered her world without a second thought, and now he stood on her doorstep, threatening to shatter the new one she had so painstakingly built from the ruins. "He is no one," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "He is a stranger, and he is leaving." She looked directly at Alistair, her gaze unflinching, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. Now, Alistair felt as if the ground had been ripped from under him. A son. He had a son. A boy with his own eyes, his own hair, who had to be at least 5, maybe 6 years old. The math was brutally simple. Eleanor had been pregnant when he sent her away, pregnant with his child, his heir. The revelation was not a joy. It was a physical agony, a hot knife twisting in his gut. He had not just cast out his wife. He had abandoned his own child, left him to be born in disgrace, to be raised in poverty, all because of his own monumental, unforgivable pride. The weight of his failure was so immense, it threatened to bring him to his knees right there on the stone step of her tiny cottage. I did not know," he stammered, the words inadequate, pathetic. Eleanor gave a short, bitter laugh that was utterly devoid of humor. "Of course you did not know. You did not ask. You did not look. You simply condemned." She pushed Arthur gently back into the cottage. "Go to your room, my love. Play with your shells." The boy looked from his mother's rigid back to the tall, sad stranger, a flicker of confusion on his face. But he obeyed, scurrying inside. Once he was gone, Eleanor's composure cracked, just for a moment. Her shoulders slumped, and the fury in her eyes was replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "Why are you here, Alistair? After all this time? Has my ruin ceased to be entertaining?" "No," he said, the word raw. "Eleanor, I was wrong. I was deceived. It was all a lie." He reached into his coat, his hand shaking, and pulled out the folded report from the inquiry agent. "Frederick. It was all Frederick. He paid the maid. He forged the letters. I have proof. Sworn statements. Everything." He held it out to her, a pathetic offering. "I came to find you, to beg you to tell you the truth." She stared at the papers in his hand but made no move to take them. "The truth?" she repeated, her voice laced with a cynicism so profound it wounded him. "The truth is that you did not trust me. The truth is you believed the word of a jealous man over your own wife. That is the only truth that matters. Your brother's scheming is irrelevant." "It is not irrelevant," he insisted, taking a desperate step closer. "It is the reason for all of this. He wanted the title. He wanted you. He poisoned me against you. And you were such fertile ground for his poison to grow," she shot back, her voice rising. "Did he hold a pistol to your head and force you to cast me out? Did he compel you to believe I was capable of such a betrayal? No, you did that all on your own. You and your damnable pride." Every word was true. Every accusation landed like a perfectly aimed blow. He had no defense. He could not excuse his actions. He could only try to atone for them. "I know," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know, and I will spend the rest of my life making it right, if you will let me." His gaze flickered toward the cottage door. "Our son, what is his name?" "His name is Arthur," she said, her tone fiercely protective. "And he is my son. You forfeited any claim to him 6 years ago." "He is the Marquis of Northwood," Alistair said, the title sounding absurd in this simple, windswept place. "He is the heir to Blackwood." "He is a boy who likes to fish and collect shells," Eleanor countered, her eyes flashing. "He will not be a title. He will not be a pawn in your games of succession. I will not let you take him from me and feed him into that cold, heartless machine." "I would never take him from you," he said, horrified she would even think it. "Eleanor, I came here to bring you home, both of you, as my wife and my son, to restore you to your rightful place." "My rightful place?" She laughed again, a sound of pure disbelief. "My rightful place was on my knees, begging for your trust while you looked at me as if I were dirt beneath your boot. My rightful place was wandering the roads, pregnant and terrified, with nowhere to go. I have found my own place now, Your Grace, and it is here, without you." The finality in her voice was like a door slamming shut in his face. He saw then the chasm that lay between them. It was not a simple misunderstanding that could be cleared up with evidence and apologies. It was a wound 6 years deep, and it had festered. He could not force her. He could not command her. The Duke of Blackwood had no power here. Here, he was just a man who had broken the heart of the only woman he had ever truly loved, and he was staring at the consequences. "I am not leaving," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "I will not leave Seabrook until you have heard everything, until you believe me." "I do not care what you do," she said, turning her back on him. "Stay or go. It makes no difference to me." She walked into the cottage and closed the door firmly behind her, leaving him standing alone in the salty air, the damning proof of his brother's treachery still clutched in his hand. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of total, soul-crushing defeat. Yet beneath the despair, a flicker of something else ignited within him. A stubborn, ducal resolve that had served him well in boardrooms and parliamentary debates. She had not screamed or thrown things. She had met his gaze and spoken her truth with a strength he had never seen in her before. The quiet, gentle woman he had married was gone. In her place was this formidable, resilient survivor, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that winning her back would be the hardest, most important fight of his life. He turned from her door and walked toward the village center, his mind already working. He would not be the Duke here. He would be Alistair, and Alistair would have to learn patience. He would have to earn what he had once taken for granted. He found the village's only inn, a modest, clean establishment called the Salty Dog, and took a room. He sent his pristine carriage and his liveried driver back to Blackwood with a note for his solicitor. He was not a visitor. He was a resident, for as long as it took. Days bled into a week. Alistair established a routine born of quiet desperation. Each morning, he would walk from the inn to the low stone wall that overlooked the bakery and Eleanor's cottage. He would watch as she and Arthur left, the boy skipping ahead, chattering brightly, Eleanor following with a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. They would walk to the small village school, and Eleanor would continue on to her work at the bakery. He never approached. He never spoke. He simply watched, a silent, penitent sentinel. The villagers watched him back. They were curious but wary. News of the Duke's presence had spread like wildfire. They saw his fine clothes, his somber expression, and they saw how his gaze always followed Ellen, the baker's quiet assistant. They put 2 and 2 together and came up with a story worthy of a penny. Dreadful. Eleanor was acutely aware of his presence. It was a constant, low-grade pressure at the back of her neck. She saw him on his morning vigil. She saw him in the village, speaking quietly with the fishermen, paying for his meals at the inn with cash, his ducal signet ring a flash of gold in the rustic taproom. He made no demands on her time. He did not try to force a conversation. This quiet, respectful patience was more unnerving than any command would have been. It was not the behavior of the arrogant man she remembered. One afternoon, Agnes Finch found Eleanor staring out the bakery window, her hands still in a bowl of scone mix. Agnes, a woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing, came to stand beside her. "He's a persistent devil. I'll give him that," Agnes said, her voice dry. "He's a fool," Eleanor muttered. "Most men are," Agnes agreed easily. "But not all of them are willing to look like one in a village full of strangers for a week straight, just for a glimpse of the woman they've wronged. There's a story there, girl. And you're the only one who knows the ending." Eleanor sighed, turning back to her work. "There is no ending. It's over." But was it? She hated him for it, but his quiet persistence was chipping away at the ice around her heart. She found herself watching him too. She saw the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was looking, the profound loneliness in his expression. It was a look she recognized. It was the same look she had seen in her own reflection for years. The breakthrough, when it came, was not from Alistair, but from Arthur. Eleanor was mending one of Arthur's shirts by the fire one evening when her son looked up from his book. "Mama," he said, his brow furrowed in thought. "The sad man was at the docks today." Eleanor's needle paused. "Oh?" "He was watching the gulls. I asked him why he was sad." Eleanor's heart leaped into her throat. "Arthur, I have told you not to speak to strangers." "He's not a stranger," Arthur said with the simple logic of a child. "He's the man from our door. He said his name is Alistair. He taught me how to skip stones. The flat ones are the best. He made one jump 7 times. The domesticity of the image, Alistair, the Duke of Blackwood, skipping stones with his son, sent a tremor through her. He had spoken to Arthur. He had not used the boy to get to her. He had simply spent time with him. "What else did you talk about?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "He asked about my shells, and about school, and he asked if I liked living by the sea." Arthur paused, chewing on his lip. "Then he asked if I missed my papa." Eleanor froze. "What did you say?" "I told him I didn't have one," Arthur said simply. And then, he looked even sadder. He looked like he was going to cry. "Why would that make him cry, Mama?" Eleanor put down her sewing, her hands trembling. She pulled her son into her lap, holding him tight. The image of Alistair, the powerful, controlled Duke, brought to the brink of tears by his son's innocent words, was more powerful than any apology. It was a crack in his armor. It was a glimpse of the man underneath the title, a man consumed by a grief that mirrored her own. The next day she found him on the cliffs overlooking the churning sea. The wind whipped his dark hair and pressed his fine coat against his frame. He did not look like a duke. He looked like a man adrift. She walked up behind him, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. "You spoke to my son." He turned, startled. Hope and fear warred in his eyes. "Yes. I am sorry if I overstepped. He approached me. I could not turn him away." "He said you taught him to skip stones." Alistair gave a faint, sad smile. "My father taught me. On the lake at Blackwood. It seems to be the one useful thing I have retained from my childhood." They stood in silence for a moment, the roar of the surf filling the space between them. "I read your papers," she said finally, her voice low. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. You did?" "Agnes brought them from the innkeeper. She said I was a fool for not at least looking at them." She had read them the night before, the sworn affidavit from the maid, the analysis from a handwriting expert, confirming the forgeries. the copies of bank drafts showing large sums of money moving from Frederick's accounts to the maid's. The proof was absolute, meticulous, and damning. It laid out the cold, calculated nature of the betrayal in excruciating detail. "Then you know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You know I was a fool, a pawn. He played on my pride, on my fears for the succession." "He played on your lack of faith in me," she corrected him, her gaze steady. "That is the part I still do not understand, Alistair. Why was it so easy for you to believe the worst of me?" He looked away, out at the endless gray horizon. His ducal mask fell away, and she saw a man stripped bare, his shame and regret exposed to the harsh sea wind. "Because I did not believe I was worthy of your love," he confessed, the words torn from him. "My parents' marriage was a contract. Love was not a part of the ducal vocabulary. I was raised on duty, legacy, and responsibility. When you looked at me with genuine affection, it felt foreign, unearned. I did not understand it. And because I could not understand it, I could not trust it. Frederick's lies found purchase because they confirmed my own deepest, unspoken fear, that I was not a man a woman like you could truly love. It was easier to believe in a grand betrayal than in a simple, quiet love I did not feel I deserved." The confession was devastating. It was not an excuse. It was a reason, born of a lonely, loveless childhood she had only ever glimpsed. It reframed everything. He had not been cruel. He had been broken long before she ever met him. She felt the anger that had been her constant companion for 6 years begin to dissolve, replaced by a profound, aching sorrow. A sorrow for the man he had been, for the woman she had been, and for the years they had lost to his fear and his brother's jealousy. "What do you want from me, Alistair?" she asked, the question soft, genuine. He turned back to face her, his gray eyes raw with unshed tears. "A second chance," he said simply. "Not to go back. We can never go back, but to go forward. Together. I want to be a father to our son. I want to be a husband to you. A real one, this time. Not a duke playing a part, but a man who loves you. I will earn your trust, even if it takes another 6 years, even if it takes the rest of my life." He did not touch her. He did not try to persuade her. He simply stood before her, offering her his broken, contrite heart and the honest, painful truth. Eleanor looked at this man, this stranger who was her husband, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was small, fragile, and terrifying. It was hope. "I do not know if I can," she whispered, the admission costing her dearly. "The woman you married is gone." "I know," he said, his gaze full of a new, quiet understanding. "And I am not the man who sent her away. Let me get to know Ellen, the baker's assistant. Let her get to know Alistair, the man who skips stones with his son. The Duke can wait." The decision was not a sudden storm, but a slow turning of the tide. Eleanor did not agree immediately. She could not. The walls around her heart were too thick. But she did not send him away either. She allowed him into their life in small, measured increments. He began to join her and Arthur on their morning walk to the schoolhouse. He would walk a respectful distance behind, but he was there. Arthur would often run back to him, pulling him forward to show him a particularly interesting crab or a piece of sea glass. Alistair would kneel, his fine trousers getting sandy, and listen with a solemn intensity that made Eleanor's chest ache. He was learning to be a father, one tentative step at a time. He started taking his supper at Agnes's bakery instead of the inn. He would sit at a small corner table, nursing a mug of ale, and watch them work. He never interrupted, never offered unsolicited advice. But one evening, when a heavy sack of flour was delivered, he was on his feet before the delivery boy could struggle, hoisting the sack onto his shoulder and carrying it to the storeroom as if it weighed nothing. He returned, dusted the flour from his coat, and quietly returned to his seat. Agnes had watched the entire exchange with a shrewd glint in her eye. "For a duke, he's surprisingly useful," she remarked to Eleanor later, her voice gruff with approval. Eleanor found herself talking to him more. The conversations were stilted at first, circling around the safe topic of Arthur. But slowly, they deepened. He told her about Blackwood, about the suffocating emptiness of the grand rooms, about the changes he was making to the estate, focusing more on the welfare of the tenants. He spoke of his own loneliness with a raw honesty that disarmed her. In turn, she told him about her life in Seabrook, about the terror of her first few months, the kindness of Agnes, the simple joy of mastering a perfect bake. She told him about Arthur's first steps, his first words, the small, precious moments of a life he had missed. She did not spare him the painful details, and he did not flinch from them. He listened, his face a mask of sorrow and regret, accepting the weight of her story as part of his penance. One afternoon, a letter arrived for him by special courier. He read it in the inn's common room, his face growing thunderous. Eleanor, who had come to deliver a meat pie for the innkeeper, saw the look on his face and hesitated at the door. He looked up and saw her. "It is done," he said, his voice grim. "My solicitor has concluded the matter with Frederick." "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I have disowned him," Alistair said, the words falling like stones. "His allowance is cut off. His name is to be struck from the family Bible. He is exiled to the continent with a small, one-time settlement. If he ever sets foot in England again, I will have him prosecuted for fraud. I have also made a full confession of my own part in the matter to the family trustees. I told them I unjustly accused my wife and sent her away, and that I have spent the last 6 years searching for her. Your name is cleared, Eleanor. Officially, legally. No stain will ever touch you or Arthur again." He had not just punished his brother. He had implicated himself. He had confessed his own failure to the very men who held his family's legacy in their hands. He had sacrificed his own pride on the altar of her honor. It was the grandest, most selfless gesture he could have made. She walked over to his table and sat down opposite him. She looked at his hands, strong and aristocratic, now bearing a few small calluses from the odd jobs he had insisted on doing around the village. She looked at his face, no longer a mask of cold duty, but etched with the hard-earned lines of humility and grief. "Thank you," she said, the words heartfelt. He reached across the table, his hand hovering over hers for a long moment, before he finally, gently covered it with his own. His touch was warm, hesitant, questioning. It was the first time he had touched her since his arrival. It sent a jolt through her, not of fear, but of a long, dormant familiarity. "There is something else," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "The birthmark, behind Arthur's left ear, the crescent moon." Eleanor nodded. "Yes." "I have it too," he said quietly. "My father had it, his father before him. It is a Beaumont mark. Even without the eyes, I would have known he was mine the moment I saw it." He had not needed to see it. He had known Arthur was his son from the moment he had looked into his eyes. But the mark was something more. It was an undeniable physical link, a thread of continuity that even his foolishness had not been able to sever. It was a sign that Arthur belonged, not just to her, but to a long line of Blackwood men. That night, she could not sleep. She lay in her small bed, listening to the sound of the sea and the quiet breathing of her son in the next room. Alistair's touch lingered on her skin. His confession echoed in her mind. He was not just atoning for his past. He was actively building a different future, a future where honor was not about pride, but about truth, where strength was not about command, but about service. She thought of Blackwood Manor. She had hated its cold, dark, judging silence. But it was Arthur's birthright. It was a legacy of power and influence that, in the right hands, could do immense good. In Alistair's new hands, and perhaps in hers. She was not the timid girl who had first walked its halls. She was a woman who knew how to work, how to survive, how to build a life from nothing. Perhaps Blackwood did not need to be a cage. Perhaps it could be a home, if she was the one helping to make the rules. The next morning she met him on the beach. Arthur was running ahead, chasing sandpipers at the water's edge. "I have been thinking," she began, not looking at him. "A dangerous pastime," he said, a hint of his old, wry humor in his voice. She allowed herself a small smile. "I will not come back to Blackwood as the Duchess you married." His face fell slightly, but he nodded. "I do not expect you to." "If I come back," she continued, finally turning to meet his gaze, "I come back as your partner, an equal. In our marriage, in raising our son, and in running the estate. I will not be a decorative figurehead. My hands are not soft anymore, Alistair. I intend to use them." A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, transforming him. It was a genuine, unguarded smile of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the smile she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That is all I have ever wanted, even when I was too foolish to know it." He stepped closer, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. "Are you saying yes?" "I am saying we can try," she whispered. "We can go home and try." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound gratitude. It was a kiss of homecoming, of promises made, of a future reclaimed from the ashes of the past. It tasted of salt and tears and the faintest, most stubborn glimmer of hope. On the shoreline, Arthur let out a whoop of delight as a wave chased him up the sand, his laughter carrying on the wind, a bright, beautiful sound that promised a new beginning. Returning to Blackwood was like stepping into a half-forgotten dream. The oppressive silence Eleanor remembered was the first thing to go. It was replaced by the sound of Arthur's running feet on the marble floors, and his excited shouts as he discovered the sheer, glorious scale of his new home. Alistair had been true to his word. He had dismissed the severe, judgmental housekeeper who had been a source of misery for Eleanor, and several other servants who had been loyal to Frederick. In their place, he instructed Eleanor to hire whom she pleased. Her first act as the reinstated Duchess of Blackwood was to send for Agnes Finch. She offered the baker a handsome pension and the role of head housekeeper, a position Agnes accepted with a gruff, "Someone has to keep you aristocrats from making a mess of things." The familiar, comforting scent of baking bread soon began to permeate the cavernous kitchens of the manor. Eleanor and Alistair rebuilt their life not on the fractured foundations of the past, but on the new, solid ground they had found in Seabrook. Their nights were not spent in separate, silent bedrooms, but together. They talked for hours, filling in the 6-year gap that separated them, sharing stories, fears, and dreams. They were cautious, respectful, learning each other anew. Intimacy grew not from duty, but from shared laughter over Arthur's antics, from quiet moments of understanding, from the simple, profound act of falling asleep in the same bed, a bulwark against the ghosts of their past. Eleanor became Alistair's partner in truth. She sat with him in the library, the site of her greatest humiliation, and went over the estate ledgers. Her practical, hard-won knowledge of household management proved invaluable. She saw waste where he saw tradition, and opportunity where he saw obligation. Together they established a school for the tenants' children on the estate, modeled after the simple but effective schoolhouse in Seabrook. They improved the cottages, lowered rents for those struggling, and used the Blackwood fortune not as a tool of power, but as an engine for good. One crisp autumn afternoon, months after their return, Eleanor stood at the long gallery window, watching Arthur on the lawn below. He was trying to teach a new puppy, a gift from Alistair, to fetch a stick. The dog was more interested in chewing on Arthur's boots. Alistair came to stand beside her, his presence a familiar comfort. He followed her gaze, a soft smile on his face. The house felt alive now, filled with warmth and light. He had ordered the heavy velvet draperies, the ones that had always seemed to swallow the sun, to be taken down and replaced with lighter fabrics that welcomed the day. He slipped his hand into his pocket and brought out a small, velvet box. He did not kneel. He simply held it out to her. "I kept it," he said quietly. "All this time. I think it belongs to you." She opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded silk, was the Blackwood sapphire. It was an enormous, ostentatious ring, a symbol of legacy, of ownership, a beautiful, heavy weight. It was the ring she had left on her vanity 6 years ago, as a final act of severing her old life. She looked from the ring to Alistair's hopeful, searching face. Then she closed the box with a soft snap and placed it on the windowsill beside them. She held up her left hand. It was bare, save for the faint white lines of old burns and nicks from her years in the bakery. It was the hand of a woman who worked, who survived, who created. "That ring belongs to the woman I was," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It belongs to a duchess who was a symbol. I am not her anymore, and you are not the duke who gave it to her." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a wave of such profound love and respect that it took her breath away. "I think," she continued, a slow smile spreading across her face, "that we should choose a new one. Something simpler, something that tells our story, not the story of your ancestors." She met his gaze, her heart full. Together. Alistair looked at the closed box on the windowsill, a relic of a past they had finally laid to rest. Then he looked at his wife, his partner, the resilient, magnificent woman who had saved them both. He took her strong, capable hand in his, lacing their fingers together. "Together," he agreed, his voice filled with the promise of 1,000 tomorrows. The estate had its heir, but he, Alistair Beaumont, finally had everything that truly mattered. He had a home,